Good morning. If you are watching this, that means you're ready to work on your exposition. That means that you have built your character, built the background of your story. You have done the background information on the character or the backstory of your character. You have mapped out your plot line. You know where your story's going, and you are ready to write the first scene. If you've ever seen a play, it happens in scenes. It happens in chunks so that the audience can digest the different parts. You're going to write your first scene, which is going to contain your exposition and the inciting incident or the thing that gets the problem started. There's a lot of different ways to write exposition, and I will talk about that in a minute, and I will show you some details, and I will upload some resources for you to try some different things if you don't know what you want to do. If you know what you want to do, I will give you my blessing to go ahead and get started once this video is over. First, we're going to look at just what that exposition is and what's important and some examples.
The exposition of a story is where important details of a story are exposed. This takes place in the beginning of a story. Notice how the word exposition comes from the word exposed, which literally means to reveal or to make something known. There are three parts of an exposition to consider. Each of these will be exposed during the exposition. First is the setting. This is the where and the when the story takes place. Next, we have the characters, which involve who is in the story. Finally, we have the main conflict, or the main problem that is going to drive the action and the excitement of the story. So first we have the setting. The setting explains where a story takes place. It also explains when a story takes place. Sometimes it's very specific. For example, Romeo and Juliet takes place in Verona, Italy during the 1300s. Other times the setting is more vague. For example, Star Wars takes place a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. In either case, the setting is created the way it is on purpose. Sometimes the author wants the reader to be thinking of a very specific time period, such as in Romeo and Juliet. And other times, the author either cannot identify a specific time period or does not want to limit the reader's imagination by locking them into a specific time period.
Now, when we think about time period and specifics and not specifics, let's take a look at Sara the Brave, the story. When we take a look at Sara the Brave, does the author, does this seventh grader give us a specific time period? Hold on, let's take a look. All right, so let's take a look at Sara the Brave. Where did it go? There it went. So Sara woke up to the sound of her sister's voice. Sunlight streamed in, lighting up her posters of Taylor Swift performing at Madison Garden and Shaun White flying upside down on his snowboard at the X Games. Someday, Sara wanted to be just like them. She loved the way they were so strong, so fierce, and so proud. Her life seemed so ordinary, though, living on a quiet street in a quiet town. Would things ever change? Now, this is an example of a story that doesn't have a very specific time frame. We don't know the time because honestly, this is taking place in such a small moment of her life that knowing the cultural time frame, social context behind her is not important. But what we do learn is we learn who she looks up to. We learn who she idolizes, who she wants to emulate, who she wants to be like. We also learn that the backdrop of her life doesn't really give her a lot of opportunity to show her fierceness, her strength. She lives in this quiet town. She doesn't know if things are ever going to change. Is she going to continue to just live in this quiet town all her life? I can attest. I was from a small town, Ellington, Connecticut, and there are some people who never left Ellington. They are doing the same jobs they did right after they graduated high school. They never branched out. They never traveled. They never lived anywhere else in their lives. And that works for them. It's not a bad thing. But here, Sara clearly wants something more. And so the backdrop is set by introducing her to just her room, her private space, which is important because we have to get to know who she is very quickly because this is a short story. And then we're introduced to the backdrop of her life, which is this quiet town.
The characters are the second part of the exposition. This is simply the main people. It could even be animals or even objects that will be involved in the story. Not all of the main characters are introduced during the very beginning stages of a lot of stories. but at least one of the main characters and the struggle that they are going to be facing throughout the story will be introduced.
All right. So the characters, obviously, Sara is introduced in the short story Sara the Brave, and I've named it Sara the Brave. I'll be honest with you, it did not have a name to it. It did not have a title. I've named it Sara the Brave in order to have it have a title so that we can refer back to it. Now we're introduced to Sara, then we're introduced to Julie. Julie is her younger sister. Wake up, Sara. Suddenly, Sara remembered it was her little sister Julie's first day of kindergarten, and Sara was going to walk her to school. This was Sara's small chance to prove herself. Her parents just didn't seem to realize that she was grown up. Bam! We know who Sara is. She's the main character. We're introduced to Julie in such a way where we understand her age and we understand the role of Sara. And then we are introduced right away to the problem that Sara's parents just didn't seem to realize how grown up she was. So already we are introduced to the characters, we are introduced to the setting, and as we're about to watch in the video, the problem is super important to introduce in the exposition. You don't want to leave the reader hanging too long with too many details without introducing the problem. The problem is what drives the story.
The final part of the exposition is the main conflict of the story. The conflict is simply the main problem that the protagonist, who is the main character, is going to have to overcome during the story. This conflict is what helps build suspense, excitement throughout the story. In summary, the exposition occurs at the beginning of a story and exposes or reveals the setting, which is the where and the when, the characters, which is who is involved, and the conflict, which is what the problem that's going to create the excitement is. Thank you for watching this video.
Okay, so we know Sara's problem is her mom doesn't seem to think that she is old enough or is strong enough. And then the story goes on and the suspense is built up where she is struggling internally. She asks her mom if she can bring her sister to school. Her mom says, yeah, but don't mess it up or you'll be in trouble. That's part of the suspense building, is putting pressure on for her to perform well. Then she finds herself on the dangerous block. Fang is growling at her. She's having more internal conflict. Can I do this? I don't know. I could make it without my sister. And then she ends up making the decision to take her sister and run. And that's the turning point or the climax of the story. But for today, we're really just focusing on setting the stage with the exposition. So you want to think about what is happening. Oops, no, I don't want to do that. There we go. You want to think about what is happening in your story, and you want to think about how you're introducing the backdrop. Now, you don't just want to brain dump the backdrop on the reader. You don't just want to tell them as if you're sitting there saying, oh, this is what's happening in the story, and this is what's happening in the story, and this is what's happening in the story. And that's the tough part, is that you have to find a way to craft it, to introduce it to us in such a way that it's not just tell. Here's my character. Here's what he's about. Here's what's going on. You want to craft it so you hook us in. Let's take a look at some strategies. All right, let's take a look at some strategies here. So here are 3 strategy leads. Now, these are not the only one, and you are welcome if you're someone who wants to do a little research. When you sit down to write your exposition, you are welcome to look up some structures and some leads in narrative writing that might appeal to what you want to write, or maybe you are already writing and you already know, so you are feeling comfortable. But if you're not feeling comfortable, I will make this resource available in Schoology for you. So here we have the talking lead. So there was a bat in our house last summer. This is super boring. It's kind of, it's just telling, right? Here's a lead where there's people talking and dialogue, kind of like in the story. We see the sister waking Sara up. We see Julie waking Sara up. We see a little bit of her background, and then we see her waking her up. So we dive right into getting information from Julie. So here, quick, hit the floor, my dad yelled. Whatever you do, don't look up, my mother added as I dropped to the floor and slid myself under the bed. It was a terrifying night for my family when we discovered a bat in our house. So that is way more exciting. It really hooks me in, as opposed to last summer there was a bat in my house. So what could your character be saying that would draw us right into the conversation? But then, of course, you are able to then give information about characters in setting in not just a telling way. Another lead strategy is a sound effect. So there was a loud storm outside my house last night. Kind of boring. It makes the reader have to think about what that might sound like or look like versus smash, the window cracked, the wind howled and the door flung open. Rain poured in through the screen, drenching the welcome mat inside her house. I will never forget the fierce storm that invaded my house last night. Far more exciting, puts us in the moment. We see what's happening. We see the result. The floor mat is wet, the door flung open, the cracking windows really puts us in the middle of what is happening there. Now, from there, if they were telling a story about, like, maybe this story could be that the storm is foreshadowing some kind of a big storm in the person's life, which it becomes this symbolism. So that would be a really, really sophisticated way to crack this, to start this off by putting us right in the middle of something that's going on. And then maybe the next morning, the person looked out and saw the debris all over the yard. And then they went to school and they had a big problem or confrontation. And so that storm that happened at their house was kind of like mirroring what was going to happen in their life. Just something to think about. And the last one is the snapshot lead, where you're using very specific description in order to capture the reader's attention. So ice skating is my favorite sport. Super boring. If you've never ice skated before, you might not have any idea what that looks like or feels like. If you have before, depending on your experience, you have to bring what you know to the table versus it's 10 degrees below zero and the river was frozen a foot thick. It makes snapping sounds like the limbs of a cracking tree. A lone figure glides along the black ice, moving toward the city. The only sound is the scraping of each blade as it bites into the river. That's me doing my favorite sport, ice skating. Man, that's a much more powerful snapshot of what is going on. So maybe your character is an athlete and the beginning of the story puts them in the middle of practice, or maybe they lose a game, or maybe they lose another one-on-one with their brother. I know someone in this class is doing like a basketball with their brother where they're competing. So maybe you put us right in the middle of the shot. There's sweat dripping down your forehead. You've been playing for an hour. Your muscles are aching and shaking. You can feel the ripples and the bumps on the ball. You have to make this shot. It's going to make all the difference in the world. And then you miss. And then you go into a little bit of conversation about what's happening and why you're there. My brother always wins. He always wins these shots. Why can't I be more like him? Now you're setting up the background of the story and the conflict of the story simply from a very vivid description of something that's going on in the moment. So I will be working with people individually. I will make all of these things available to you, the leads, and a place where you can begin your exposition or the first part of your story. And I look forward to reading what you have. If none of these leads really work with the story that you're imagining in your mind, then you could do some research and look at some other leads for narrative writing. Can't wait to see what you write. I'm excited about this. This is the good stuff.